Saints fans and Who-Dats from all over the world. It's time for the Bayou Blitz. With your host, Bob Rose.
Happy Wednesday, New Orleans Saints fans of the NFL and fans of the Bayou Blitz everywhere. I hope everybody is having an enjoyable week. I know I am. We certainly thank you for welcoming us into your homes and over your airwaves again on this Wednesday night. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your happy, joyous, go-lucky hosts of the Bayou Blitz. And joining me, as always, is my friend and the man who held Jared Cook hostage until he signed his contract, Mr. Kyle T. Mosley. How are you tonight, Kyle?
Hey, man, you don't need to be publicizing that right now, man. I was hanging out with Jussie, and he told me how I could be able to circumvent the process. So, but anyway, I'm giving too much on the air. Hey, how you guys doing? Who that nation? What's going on? Look, you guys got to be excited with all the shenanigans going on with the NFL.
Shenanigans is one of the SH terms I'd use for it, for sure. Yeah, as many of you probably know, and is what Kyle is referring to is the owners and GMs and coaches of the NFL have met over the last few days, and have actually made some big headlines. Normally, when these meetings take place, there's some mumblings about potential rule changes and this and that, but mostly a lot of words. But this time coming out of these meetings, now we'll see what comes of it. But there were a couple of big headlines, and a couple of which surrounded, of course, our New Orleans Saints. Kyle, you speak legalese much more than I do. I've been on the wrong side of the legalese a couple of times. But if you want to give our fans who don't know kind of the lowdown and version of what's happened over the last few days.
As far as the legalese is concerned, look, Who Dat Nation, bottom line is Roger Goodell pulled a gangster move on those guys. And you're going to listen to a tape later. Mike Pereira, former head of the officials, he didn't like what went down, and especially how it went down. A lot of times people are going to say, well, these rule changes usually would take months and probably years, right, Bob, to actually go into effect. But this was an extraordinary circumstance. So, Who Dat Nation, everyone knows the NOLA no call with the two referees failing to flag the hit on Tommy Lee that really affected the Saints' ability to go into the Super Bowl against the Patriots. So the NFL Rules Committee, in which our own Sean Payton, who is a great member of it, and he really led the charge when it came down to the Rules Committee coming up with the replay changes. It's a stunning turn of events, really, Bob, what had happened, because when I listened to an interview with the president of the New Orleans Saints, Mr. Lastra, he was saying he really did not believe that there was going to be any hope for the NFL to make this an official change or rule, right? So the New Orleans Saints had a lot to do with it. I believe Gail Benson's letter as an owner after the debacle and the most egregious non-call in the history of the National Football League had a lot to do with it as well. So let's just kind of give a breakdown, Bob, when it comes down to what has happened. So pass interference on the offensive side as well as defensive side now can be reviewed. So the NFL has decided to expand the replay on that, as well as no more blindside blocks. But the the largest and most impactful one came from Roger Goodell really putting pressure on the owners, and when the coaches got involved with the officiating side and really trying to not overcomplicate the whole instance, right? But the owners listened to the coaches, and when they put it up for after, I think they went through 6 revisions, right? When they finally came down to making the decision, 31 owners and only one owner, the Bengals owner, was against the proposal. So it's only going to be into effect for 1 year. So they're going to test it out for 1 year, which is pretty extraordinary because usually they would go ahead and take some time during preseason sometimes to kind of work out the kinks and what have you. But, Bob, I really believe it came down to a couple of things, in my opinion. Really, these type of changes are motivated by, one, money, 2, public reputation of that shield, and 3, we all know they make changes based upon health concerns in the NFL. Well, this wasn't a health concern type of issue, and staying consistent.
It is if Roger Goodell ever crosses in front of me in a red light, but go on.
You as well as many in the Who Dat Nation, right? But when they set this into to become a new standard for the National Football League, usually when and I kind of disagree with Mike Pereira on this one. I guess his perception of the rules or what officials do. Most of the times officials make calls based upon how they're governed, based upon what facts are giving to them, and there's human element into it, right? But those can be obvious mistakes out there on the field. And being clear and obvious a lot of times is not so clear and obvious. It's really muddled, right? So it takes a subjective point of view from time to time for an official to be able to make a call. So Mike Pereira believed that officials only look at facts in the way they're officiating games. And you can't tell me that is true. From all the years I've seen football, my 52 years, I watched the Saints all my life, and I've seen many a failed call, right? But I just believe this decision to allow the replay is really affected by the public perception of what occurred in that National Football Conference championship game, and if Sean Payton, and remember, Drew Brees got into it as well, the rest of the Saints fans, Mardi Gras, and remember, that was a huge public perception. The no calls, the blind referees, the trinkets that were thrown at the parades and everything. That was not only local news, it was international news about the whole how that was being displayed. So this went not only within the football circles, it transcended beyond just National Football League, and you had basketball players, baseball players, NASCAR people. People were all talking about how egregious this call was. So I believe Roger Goodell made a strong move to be able to tell the owners how important it was for us to be able to put something in place. Remember, after Brett Favre didn't get his chance in the National Football Conference championship game against us, they changed the rule immediately that every team had an opportunity to be able to score if a touchdown wasn't made. Remember? So when these guys are making decisions, these owners really followed Roger Goodell's push. Now, I'm not saying Roger Goodell is a great man as a result. All I'm saying is that this 1 year testing of this could really serve as how they're going to expand this replay system for years to come, and, could it lead to more penalties? Can it help to impact games? So a lot of people who are very conservative in their viewpoint believes it's going to be more negative to the game. It's going to slow down the game. I'd rather them get the game right versus having many fan bases really upset with the outcome of a game that affected the larger game in a nutshell. And I wonder also, Bob, did the Rams' performance in the Super Bowl also had them thinking, wow, the Saints could have been a more formidable opponent against the Patriots and should have been there. And you heard a lot of that after the Super Bowl as well. So this was a public relations nightmare. I think they're trying to correct all too late, because one thing that's kind of overlooked, we still haven't heard if those two referees are going to come back to the National Football League and officiate, right? And why didn't that head judge, when he saw Sean Payton protesting, walk over to those guys and ask what was going on? You noticed that, right? So those are two things that really needed to be addressed, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it won't be because we know that we know this NFL administration. Look, Saints fans, NFL fans in general, and obviously this is just my take and my opinion on the matter. What Roger the Dodger did in the last couple of days is equivalent to, he came in, he robbed our house, and then he offered to buy us dinner to make up for it. This doesn't change anything as far as what happened in the NFC Championship game. And, hey, look, we said it at the time, and you and I both knew, Kyle, they were never going to replay that game. That sets a dangerous precedent that nobody really wanted any parts of. You can cry conspiracy theories all you want. There's some smoke there. We've hashed over that. Those conspiracists that are those believers in conspiracies for all the different reasons that we have talked about, you can steadfastly believe in that too. It still doesn't change what happened. Hopefully it won't happen to the Saints or anybody else for that matter. As jilted and bitter as many of us feel and have felt since that NFC Championship game, the ones that are still in the most pain, and will always be in the most pain, were the ones that were wearing black and gold on the field that day, and the opportunity that it took from them. And I'm just, the reason why I'm speaking the way I am now is I'm picturing myself in a black and gold uniform or on that Saints sideline that day, and how I would feel not only then, but now about this ruling. I'm like you, Kyle. I don't care if it makes the game longer as long as they get it right. To me, and you just brought up the perfect point, it still doesn't explain why two officials that were literally standing feet away from the play, when two fouls simultaneously happened, as black and white as they could happen. Yeah, I get, and we've had former players on here that have said the officials tend to put the flags away or try to put the flags away in games like that. And I get it. I agree with that philosophy. But the rules are still the rules. And when they're that egregious, and it was that blatantly obvious, and A, you didn't make the call that was so easy to make and impossible to avoid, in my opinion, and B, you didn't hold yourself accountable. You didn't stand up and hold yourself accountable. And C, and maybe the worst offense of it all, is that nobody has held the powers higher than them, that judge them, that pay them to do a job, never held them accountable. And we've been waiting for 2.5, going on 3 months now, with still not an answer. So at this point, I don't expect to get one. I'm ready to move on into 2019.
Right. And there's nothing that can be done. History is just what it is, history. It's the past. But what we have learned, and I believe from public sentiment and the pressure it put on the National Football League. Now, I did bring up the financial side, right? And the only thing I can gather, and I have no facts about this whatsoever, I wonder if some of the major sponsors also voiced their concern. Think about it. You know, they could be affected by the lack of viewership if people decide to turn off their televisions. You know, so I think that in the combination with the public sentiment may have really motivated Goodell to be able to make this move. Because remember at the Super Bowl, it didn't seem like he was convinced anything should be done. So what changed in between? What numbers were shown to them how it can negatively impact the brand? That's why decisions are made, people. I'm telling you. Stop thinking that they're doing this for the good of the game or everything else. No, they're doing this because there was some negative pushback somewhere that was going to affect their pocketbooks. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. That's all I have to say.
Now let's move on to happy, maybe not happier, but certainly more exciting matters. We mentioned the imminent signing of tight end Jared Cook last week as we came onto the air, and it finally happened officially 2 days ago. The Saints made their big splash at pass receiver, in this case a tight end, that everybody wanted them to make since the season did end. And they signed Jared Cook, 31-year-old. I believe he's a 9-year veteran, still in the prime of his career. They signed him to a 2-year contract. The first year is guaranteed at about $8 million, if I do believe. And the second year, I've heard some different. It's a voidable year. I don't know which party or parties have the option to void that. The important thing is Jared Cook will be in a New Orleans Saints uniform this year. How do you grade that pick, Kyle?
Well, the New Orleans Saints needed somebody with Watson exiting the building due to retirement. Human could never be that type of receiving threat for the Saints. We have really had a void of a real true receiving tight end since Jimmy Graham's departure through the trade to Seattle, right? So, if you remember what happened early in the Rams' Saints NFC Championship game when Dan Arnold had that opportunity to catch the football and drop the football where Drew Brees threw the ball, the only best place he could have thrown that ball with two defenders around him. And really, a lot of people, if you really look at that play, that was a remarkable pass by Drew Brees. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So when Dan Arnold had the football in his hands and could not secure it, and you saw that throughout the season where he had a couple of drops as well as he was hit after the catch and dropped the football, you see the athletic ability of a Jared Cook. And you got to really picture if Jared Cook was in that same, I guess, situation that Dan Arnold was, I believe that was a 4-point swing that would have been in the favor of the New Orleans Saints. And you see through the obvious outcome of the game, that 4 points would have really been critical for Saints to win the National Football Conference championship. Okay? So you look at a guy like Cook, where if you give him a 2-year deal, I think he's 31, about to be 32, all right? So he is really doing pretty well as far as how John Gruden utilized him for David Carr last season. When he was with the Packers, I don't recall Cook being as remarkable as he was, right? I don't recall him really having that type of athletic ability. But knowing how Sean Payton can utilize the tight end, especially someone who can catch the football, stretch the field for the Saints, be another weapon on the field for that passing offense, being able to take pressure off of two guys like Alvin Kamara as well as Michael Thomas, I think it's an excellent pick. $15 million, let's do it. Because we really haven't had anyone to really serve as a true receiving tight end in a long, long time.
No, we haven't, and I agree with all the points that you make. Cook can not only threaten the defense down the seam, his size presents a matchup problem for most opposing safeties, and his athleticism presents a matchup problem for most opposing linebackers. He does have a nice smooth break out of his routes. He's not only a load to bring down once he does get the ball in his hands, but he does have a little bit of a wiggle in the open field that you like. He has some elusiveness too. He's not just a big lumbering dude, down the center of the field.
And he has some attitude that comes with it. Remember how Jimmy used to throw those guys down? I watched Cook's highlight film from last season, man, and he a couple of times he just misused a defensive back.
Yeah, he did. And you consider, too, that Raiders team he was on was awful. And earlier in his career, he played for the Rams, for the St. Louis Rams, and those teams were pretty bad. He came into the league. I think he played his first 4 years with the Titans, and a lot of the times they were a middle-of-the-road at best team. And he's always played with that sort of chip on his shoulder. So that tells you that he's a competitor. And now he has his first legitimate opportunity to win and I know he played the 1 year in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, but I mean he's now playing with another elite quarterback in Breeze, and like you pointed out, he's playing for a coach that has shown he will use and utilize the tight end position in much more than just a traditional sense. He's going to, Cook is just as effective as an inline tight end coming into his, going into pass patterns as he is out of the slot. And we all know him, we've seen and heard a lot of the comparisons to Jimmy Graham. Many of them are pretty valid in a positive manner, by the way. But Graham, when he was in New Orleans, was most effective when he was lined up either wide or even out of the slot. Cook is almost nearly as effective and probably more effective than Graham was even in Jimmy's prime. Is coming off of the ball, coming into his into pass patterns as an inline tight end, which gives this offense so much more flexibility. And we know that Peyton and Pete Carmichael, the offensive coordinator, we know that they like versatility, and they run multiple different packages or alignments rather. But if they can do so with basically your base personnel, we know how many things Michael Thomas can do and how many different spots in the formation that he's effective from. We know all the things that Alvin Kamara can do and all the different spots that he's effective from in the offensive formation. And Jared Cook can do some similar things. Even out of Oakland, he was utilized in some goal line packages as an H-back or a fullback.
Yep.
Where he can get into the flat as a receiver, and we already mentioned his elusiveness once he does take a short pass, and gets into the open field. So I mean, this does nothing but imminently help this offense, and gives Breeze yet another dangerous short to intermediate threat, where we know Drew has always been the most effective quarterback in the league, and one of the most effective in the history, really, because of his accuracy.
Right. And let me ask you this, Bob, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but when I look at Cook, and I looked how he was being utilized, remember they jettisoned Cooper to the Cowboys, right? So other than Cook, I can't really name the Raiders wide receivers, right? Cook really was just a bigger wide receiver, just as fast, just as elusive, right? And if you look at that body that he has, I don't know if you really can say, like you say, he's H-back more. I don't think he's more a true tight end. So the Saints still need to find a tight end to be able to come in and help Josh to be able to come in and block from time to time. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do probably pick up another free agent when it comes to a blocking tight end, or if they're able to find somebody in the draft, let's say in the middle or later rounds that has good blocking ability, that they put him in their stable for the draft pick. So I just believe there's so many different ways that he could be utilized. And I know Jimmy was fast, but I think Cook is a little bit more, has a little bit more speed, especially at his age, and that's what's astounding to me.
Yeah, me too. And I completely agree with you that I think the Saints are going to bring in another body at tight end. Excuse me. It could be another mid-level free agent that's a little bit more of a traditional tight end, or and this is where I personally think that they'll go. They'll draft one with some versatility that will be able to contribute immediately as a blocker and have some upside as a receiving threat. What this does with the signing of Jared Cook, this doesn't make tight end a desperation need as this team goes into the draft, because as we know, as it stands right now anyway, the Saints do not have a pick in the first round, third round, or fourth round. They do have 6 picks total, but they have a pick in round 2 at the end, 62nd overall, and then they don't pick again until the 5th round. So that leaves that second round pick, and we're going to have a whole lot of fun in the next month, debating and projecting and mocking where we think that this team will go, with their second round pick. But I don't think the Saints now are forced to use it on any kind of pass catcher, be it wide receiver or tight end. with that second round pick. They can go with the proverbial best player available on their draft board. Would it surprise me if they brought in either a wideout or a tight end with that second round pick? It wouldn't surprise me, but now they don't have to. Like last year, and you and I spoke about it quite a bit on this show, we were shocked that the team did not pick up a tight end at all in the draft, let alone within the first 2 days, especially with the tight ends that were available in last year's draft. And most people feel that the tight end class in this year's draft is not only more talented, but a deeper class, which makes me think all the more that if the Saints don't use that second round pick on a tight end, that they'll probably grab one in the 5th or 6th round. If we don't, I think we both expect Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton to do a little bit of movement. But I expect them to bring in another one. I agree with you, and I personally believe it's going to end up being a draft pick.
Yeah. Look, man, there's some good talent at tight end. There's some very good talent on the defensive line, good talent offensive line as well. I think the Saints have not having a first-round pick. It's not going to really be a detriment to the team. But I don't want people to think that the Saints would not try to be able to make a move somewhere, either getting into the first round with a later pick or something to that nature. We still hear rumblings. I know there was a visit with Quinn, right? And if they pick him up, who will be that trade partner, or what will the Saints give to be able to acquire him? That's still in the mix. But, man, I just believe there's so many things that could really be positive about this upcoming draft for the Saints. Ireland and those guys and his staff are really doing their due diligence. I was really happy to see them at Alabama's Pro Day, LSU's Pro Day. I don't know if we had a large contingency at Ohio State's Pro Day, and there's some really good talent there as well. So, and I think they met with a young man from Arizona State, or projected to meet with him, the wide receiver, who has been turning heads under Herm Edwards. Yeah. I mean, hey, we still need to have at least one guy to be able to stretch the field as well, right? Somebody has to be that next Ted Ginn for the New Orleans Saints. So I believe they could be looking at who they can acquire through the draft right now. So tight end doesn't have to be the primary focus for them with the signing of Cook at this time.
No, not at all. And I believe you said it when he was on the air with us a few weeks ago. When we had Quinn early on at the around the beginning of the month, and we were kind of going over the wide receiver position pending free agents, what the team currently has on the roster, and what to expect out of the development from Traquan Smith and Keith Kirkwood. Both you and I came out of that interview. I think you vocalized it, like I said, feeling a lot better about what the Saints have. But we know Sean Payton likes his toys on offense, A. And B, we know Payton, Mickey Loomis, and Jeff Ireland, they just like all NFL teams. They have their big board, and they have their players who they really, really, really want for their system. Now, last year was Marcus Davenport, for an example, at the top of their draft board. They identified him, and they decided we are going to do what it takes to go get him, and they did. This year, I kind of expect a slightly more conservative approach, where they still have their guys at the top of the big board that perhaps they don't expect to be available, we'll say, in the early to mid part of the second round. In other words, those are guys that they would have to surrender a little bit more than what they want to go get him, at least how the draft board shakes out. But we all know players tend to drop. Some rise, some drop. And if a certain player drops where all of a sudden they think, okay, we're willing to give up X and Y instead of X, Y, and Z and half of the garage and the kid's college payment to go get this guy. All of a sudden, that changes things a little bit, and that's why draft night is so exciting, because there's always so much movement, so much potential movement. So to your point, would it surprise me if the Saints did draft a wide? We'll get off tight end now. Would it surprise me if they drafted a wide receiver with the number 2 overall pick, or even if they moved up a little bit to get one? That wouldn't surprise me either. They're not leaving any stone unturned. We've seen this team have success with small school guys in the mid to early rounds. We've seen them, move heaven and earth to go get who they want, because they identify that as a need. For what this particular team is ready to do. I'm with you. I don't expect them to move up a lot. Probably at the highest, early second round, maybe late first. Again, it depends on who's there. It's not like that they're sitting there, we have to get to pick number 27 because of this reason. They have their eye on specific players. And as they drop or rise, depending on the circumstances, that's how their movement is going to dictate this coming draft.
Right. In the draft, there's always 1 or 2 surprises of guys that would, for some reason, start to fall down the draft board, right? If the Saints see someone like let's say the young man from Clemson, who's the defensive tackle, very good player. I think it's Williamson. Or if he descends down the draft board, could the Saints make a move? Or one of those offensive linemen start to take a fall as well? So somebody always falls. Someone always something happens in an interview or some documentation or some video or something foolish always comes out at the last second where it affects these young men negatively, and they drop in the draft. So that could potentially happen. I'm more concerned about this, Bob. Can the Saints, let's bypass that first round, right? Let's say you don't have anybody you could get into it. Can the Saints pick up some extra picks somewhere? Because right now, with the Cook signing and all these free agent signings with the defensive tackle and defensive end we brought in and everything, do we have enough money left to even sign our rookies, man? Or to try to sign some other guys who are going to be free agents out there, because somebody's going to get released here and there that could possibly make an impact on the team. I'm just kind of curious, man. How in the world did we sign Cook and give him a guarantee $8 million this season? I know they restructured Drew's contract, but I'm like, wow, what are they doing in that front office? I need to know.
Yeah, real well. I don't think you and I will be getting a paycheck from the New Orleans Saints anytime soon. So they cut back a couple cents and maybe $1 or $2 that way. But the math that Mickey Loomis has always worked has astounded me for years. I mean, even when they made moves that backfired, the Jarris Birds and the Paul Krugers, et cetera, we know the list. Let's not rehash those horrors. But you look at the money that they moved around or just blatantly paid to these guys, and even at the time we were saying, how are they doing this? And it's always astounded us. and it cracks me up on Saints social media. The ones, and we see it every single year. Well, the Saints aren't going to have any money at all, or the Saints won't have any money at all. Hey, who have you been following? For the last 12 years, 12 years or so. This man always gets it done. I don't know how, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to even be remotely close to a capologist. I just think that we always say on this show, and you and I always say, trust Sean Payton and trust these coaches because they will get it done. They have got it done. It's really time that Mickey Loomis, that we start saying the same thing about Mickey Loomis and that front office, because they have always done the same thing. And again, and even the best organizations, will swing and a miss on a player personnel decision every now and then. Although the last 3 or 4 years they've gotten a lot more right than they have wrong. But you can never deny this about this regime and this franchise, that they will do whatever they deem necessary to bring in the pieces that they think will work. So finances be damned. We might still be paying Mr. Breeze and Mr. Jordan into the year 2100 because they keep pushing back guarantees and shuffling things around. But this team is always, as long as this regime is in place, we can ownership, front office, Loomis, Payton. This team is always going to attempt to put a competitive product on the field, and they will figure out the finances. It's none of our jobs to. They just do an outstanding job, and I believe it's time that Mickey Loomis in that front office gets credit for that.
Yeah, definitely, man. Working with the NFL, because I know they had to void Easton's initial contract offer by the Saints because of some technicality. Cameron Meredith, he took a pay cut, Are we going to approach somebody else somewhere to take a pay cut? And I don't know, man. I'm just kind of interested to see how this rest of the season is going to play out, because think about this, Bob. We still, during the season, you have guys who get injured. You have situations where you need to be able to pick up somebody off the street or make a trade here or there, pick up someone's contract. The Saints still need to be able to negotiate and have a little wiggle room here or there. I'm just kind of interested to see how this all is going to play out. And tell me this, your thoughts on what has occurred with Mark Ingram. I've heard a little bit more about the situation, and it seems as though and we kind of alluded to this, it seemed like he played himself, but it seemed like the agent did more of the miscalculation for Mark. Sean Payton came out to say he is frustrated and was frustrated with how everything transpired. It did not, but it was kind of still questionable to me. Is somebody somewhere after that initial discussion when those guys met around the time of the combine, right? Who failed to communicate with whom? Or was there a line drawn in the sand by somebody? Because the Saints, they acted pretty quickly, didn't want to have a chance to lose out on Murray. But it seems like it more so came from Mark's camp than anybody else. What's your thought?
And based off of everything that we have heard, I would agree with that assessment. What Kyle is alluding to, folks, Sean Payton was asked this week to expound a little bit more on the Mark Ingram situation, and Coach said that he was a little bit frustrated, and that he and I'm quoting as close as I can remember, he would have liked to have had more contact with the player during the process, and I believe that it was Jeff Duncan that at least I first read it from that had said Peyton went on to say that he did try to call and text Mark.
Right.
And other than a few words in text that he received back, they really didn't have that much communication. So I did find that surprising, especially given the close relationship that Mark has with so many of his teammates. What I believe happened, based off of everything that we have heard and pieced together, and there's always, I used to say that there were two sides to every story. Now I'm more convinced, especially since I started to do this, with you guys and with you and some of our other colleagues. I'm now convinced in the subterfuge of the NFL and negotiations, there are about six sides to every story, and the truth is none of them.
Yeah.
It always kind of lies in that middle square of a Rubik's cube. But I believe what had happened was that both sides, the Mark Ingram camp, Mark and his agent or team of agents, and of course the New Orleans Saints in their front office, they each had their line drawn. And that's why they call it a negotiation. Both sides draw a line, and then hopefully there's a little bit of give on both sides to reach an ultimate agreement. While as we know that this didn't happen in this case. Basically, from what we believe happened, Mark's camp, Mark and his agent came to the Saints table with an offer. Whether that was first or whether that was in counter offer to what New Orleans initially offered, we may never know that full truth. But whatever happened, Mark Ingram overvalued himself, he and his agent, as far as either financially, as far as per year, or length of contract, or both, while the Saints had something different in mind. The Saints then turned, and I believe here is where it is pretty black and white according to how things shook out in the end. The Saints then took that same offer and went to their plan B, which ended up being a Latavius Murray. And when they did so, the trickle-down effect had Mark Ingram, of course, signing with the Ravens for a deal that was reportedly very, very close, even slightly less than what the Saints were willing to offer him. So when you come full circle and back around, that's what leads you to believe a little bit more that maybe Mr. Ingram and his party, did kind of overvalue themselves. Now, what I would like to know, and this is where I'm convinced that we'll never know the truth, is whether one or each side said, look, this is our final offer, and if you don't take it, there is no more negotiating. You would think and hope that with the years of service that Mark gave to this community and certainly this football team, that there would be a little bit of wiggle, both from the Saints and from he himself.
Okay, I'm going to say this, man. I'm going to say this.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Saints pretty much said, okay, we hadn't heard from you. Sean didn't hear from him. They didn't hear from the agent. They got impatient, did not want to lose out on a quality back like Murray, made the decision. And that's why you notice the reaction on social media from Mark and those guys were like, really? That's how it was. It was like, y'all did what? So I think they were like, okay, we're just going to sit back and wait. And free agency was looming, man. And that when that date came, let's go. They needed to have something in principle with somebody, and I just think that was a bad way they negotiated the deal, But anyway, we could talk about that on and on. But Bob, I wonder, and I'm just going to bring up this point. Sometimes a young player like an Alvin Kamara may need something like this to actually see more of his greatness.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So he's not under. Okay, let's look at Shaq and Kobe. So Shaq was the number one guy. Kobe was the rising star. The tensions were Kobe now wanted to be number one just on that same level with Shaq, right? Remember, and those guys got to be in at odds. Then the terrible situation in Denver happened with Kobe, and he sold Shaq out publicly and all this other stuff, right? But the organization had to make a decision. Are we a Shaq guy for the long term, or are we a Kobe guy, right? And they made a decision that they were going to stick with Kobe. The Saints may have made a decision also. We want you to be with us, Mark. We really enjoyed your service. We see you as a valuable source, but what you're asking of us, we just can't do it. We got other things that we need to really pay attention to. So, Alvin's going to be our guy. Latavius, they brought him in, right? So, with Murray, you don't have a guy that's has that that locker room presence like Mark Ingram had for all these years, right? So it's going to take him a little bit of time to get acclimated to that locker room.
Mm-hmm.
But will we see Alvin Kamara step up higher this season, being his third season in the league, right? This is going to be more a telltale sign for the New Orleans Saints when it comes down to these contracts which are looming. Do we keep Kamara? Do we give him a huge contract? Or do we look elsewhere? Because sometimes a young player could respond negatively if they didn't have it in their heart that they wanted to be the number one guy. And I'm not sure Kamara really has said that he wanted to be the number one guy. I think he and Mark were happy to be co-conspirators, so to speak.
I think that there's a lot of truth and or a lot of fact, a lot of proven fact in what you say. I personally believe that Alvin Kamara is more than capable of being a number one back. In my opinion, though, not in the traditional sense.
Right.
Mark Ingram was a little bit more of a traditional number one back, and by that I mean sort of old school football. 20 to 25 carries a game, maybe 5 to 7 receptions, but a lot of those checkdowns or screens or short patterns. Kamara has more of a flair for explosiveness, versatility, open field, and he's been compared to the man I'm about to say for a reason, because his style of game is very similar. Marshall Faulk also was not a number one back in the traditional sense. And when the St. Louis Rams utilized Faulk effectively, it was in that kind of knowledge. You're not going to line him up like you would a Jerome Bettis, and I'm reaching way back now, an Eric Dickerson or an Earl Campbell. Line him up in either a single back like John Riggins or an I-back formation and just hand the ball off guard 20 to 25 times a game. No, Kamara is, and Sean Payton knows this too. Kamara is most effective when you move him around the formation. There'll be games where he might get 20 carries, but he's more effective if he gets 20 to 25 touches. And that is mix it up with maybe 10 passes thrown to him and 15 carries. And that sort of thing. Do more than just line him up in the backfield.
Right.
Move him into the slot. Move him out wide. Multiple back formations. And that's where he and Ingram made such an effective tandem. Let's not discount Mark's versatility too. Mark had extremely underrated versatility, but he was your pounder. He was a bowling ball with knives, as I've heard it. I've heard it described, or angry Mark Ingram. And that's the kind of thing that Murray is going to need to bring to the table. And he is that style of back, by the way. He's not nearly the pass receiver that Ingram was, but he has good in between the tackle and capabilities. He has nice bursts once he gets into the open field. He's going to be a nice change of pace to Kamara. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I've heard people say he's not as great of a receiver as Ingram, right? I remember them saying something similar about Adrian Peterson when he was coming out of college.
Yeah.
Okay. The systems and the quarterbacks that Murray was it Carr? Then he had, Case Keenum?
Mm-hmm.
And last year, the overpaid guy? Right? Look, I just believe the offensive systems did not dictate to have a guy like Murray to catch the football.
Sure.
Now, I have witnessed him in some games catch the football out of the backfield, right? So I think it's unfair sometimes when we, the media or analysts, go out there and say, well, this guy is not great out the backfield. Well, wait till you see what Drew Brees does with this guy. That's my comeback to this, because I think it's either he's going to have to learn how to catch the ball, or he's not going to be performing for the black and gold for too much longer. So,
and let's not forget that Mark Ingram himself was not a good pass receiver coming out of Alabama. When
nobody was throwing him the ball, though, Bob. That's, again, think about it. Mark Ingram under Nick Saban wasn't asked to catch the ball out of the backfield with McElroy and whoever. I forgot the other guy's name. But he was asked to run that rock, and that's why he became the Heisman Trophy winner. Okay? Those guys at Saban, just until the last two offensive coordinators came in under him, started passing the ball to running backs. All right? There's been an evolution in the offensive scheme for Nick Saban and those guys in Alabama. So I think, how do I say this, Lord? A lot of times, man, we've got to stop saying, oh, a guy can't do this and guy can't do that. Until I see he can't do it with our team, I think he can do it, because I haven't known him to be fumble prone. Have you?
No.
I haven't known him to not make some explosive plays every now and then for his teams. You know, I've seen Murray shake and bake a few guys. you know, so I just think let's wait before we cast that perception that he's not a good backfield, a running back to catch the ball out of the backfield. Now, one thing that I do appreciate is that he does a pretty good job defending against the pass. He's a good pass blocker. So
pass blocker.
That's just my thoughts. I know we got to cut the show short in a few. Any last thoughts on the free agency, where we are? Do we make another splash? Do you think Quinn is really somebody we should go after, or should we approach Ansah, or should we just stay pat?
I like the moves that they made. If they can get someone like Robert Quinn and give up a low return in the process, and when I say low, I personally wouldn't offer any more than a fifth-round pick or maybe a couple, a fifth round this year and a fifth round next year kind of thing. It's my understanding that the Miami Dolphins are wanting at least a third, and for a team to pick up part of Quinn's rather lucrative contract.
Now, Quinn didn't even hardly...
Too rich for my blood.
Yeah, he didn't hardly start last year, right? Remember, he was injured? Mm-hmm. They've got to be off their rocker.
Yeah, and you know what? They probably, what they're asking for, they probably won't end up getting. So it depends how far they're willing to concede. But if I'm the New Orleans Saints, based off of asking price and what I personally am prepared to give up, which I just stated, if they wouldn't be closer to my own demands, then Quinn's off the table. He is still a very good pass rusher. For this New Orleans defense, he would be an excellent situational pass rusher. But they have Marcus Davenport on one edge. They have the incomparable Cam Jordan on the other edge. They don't need Robert Quinn as an edge. I think Trey Hendrickson is a solid edge guy. I know they lost Alex Okafor. And Mario Edwards Jr. is probably going to play more defense, more inside, more tackle than he is the end. But he has some versatility. So he can get in certain alignments. He can play outside a little bit to maybe give Davenport, or for that matter, even Jordan, on the 1 or 2 plays per game he rests. I like what they have there. Quinn would just be a situational piece. Now, a good one, but one I wouldn't overpay to get. I would prefer to just maybe focus on a young edge rusher in the draft if that's where they choose to go. But I mentioned Edwards. We talked about Malcolm Brown. He's a big boy, big defensive tackle that I think, and I love Tyler Davison, but I think he is a significant upgrade over Davison at defensive tackle. So I love the 2 moves they made there.
I believe Will kind of agrees. He was kind of protesting right there. Yeah.
Well, he heard me say young edge rusher, and that little man is a bull. So he's the next New Orleans Saints star defender.
That's pretty funny, man. That's funny. That's some good stuff. Saints fans, don't forget we are still looking for Bob Rose's next host.
Yeah.
So I saw that you posted that again. We'll repost the requirements out there for next week. Hopefully we can have some really good draft analysts with us coming up. We don't know what Mr. Detillier's schedule would allow, but we will find out. Also, Bob, we have some guys from Carolina as well as the Bucks camps may come in and talk with us as well.
Yes, yeah, I'm trying to line up, friends of ours, to cover the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We've had David and James on before. They're great guests, great guys. I doubt their loyalty in football teams, but other than that, they're terrific. Trying to get them back on, and a couple of our friends from over at Cat Chronicles, Carolina Panthers Tuesday night podcast. I've been on their show a couple of times. They're great guys too. Again, I question their sanity and loyalty towards football teams. But we're trying to get those guys on in the next month to kind of recap our divisional rivals, how they feel they did in free agency and where they're targeting in the draft. There's another team in the division, but they don't really count as an NFL team, so I don't know if we'll find anybody to represent that team out of Atlanta.
You know what? You know who we should approach? Bomani Jones. I would. You know what? I think I would send him a request because he was trolling us about this decision,
yes,
man. So and I had to say my little 2 cents to him on that, but. Yeah, that would be pretty interesting to see if we can get Bomani to be on here. He's a pretty funny guy, man.
He is.
Yeah, it's all good fun. I know he likes the dirty girls, but it happens that way. Well, I tell you, Saints fans, stay tuned. Listen up to read more of what Bob, Barry, and those guys at the Canal Street Chronicles put out there. Bob, tell everybody how they can follow you on the internet.
Well, first, before I do, Marcus Sherrills, if we are lucky enough to have you listening, my friend, we have not forgotten about you. I love that the Saints signed him, a very electric punt returner, and he's going to provide some cornerback depth. So welcome to the family, Marcus. And if you are listening, we'd love to have you on the show. But we didn't forget about you, big boy. We're so glad to have you as an electric performer on our special teams and as defensive backfield depth.
Yeah, one thing I like about him, he's returned, five punt returns or kickoff returns for touchdowns. He has the speed, the elusiveness, but he has a very good vision. And, guys, be aware the Saints have brought in a brand new special teams coaching staff. Sean Payton jettisoned a lot of those guys. I was surprised Mike Westhoff was let go. His contract wasn't renewed. Peyton means business, and we signed Will Lutz to a long-term contract. So it's going to be interesting to see how our special teams react, because we did suffer when it came to punt and kickoff returns last season.
But back to your question. I can be followed individually on Facebook, Bob Rose, and of course Twitter at BobbyR2613. And I post replays of our show on my personal page as well as my articles, and I of course work through the Canal Street Chronicles. Mr. John Hendricks, Mr. Reverend Deuce Wyndham, and so many guys I can name over there. Our friend John Butler, and so many great writers. But follow myself and them at Canal Street Chronicles on Facebook or at St. CST on Twitter. And ladies and gentlemen, it's mock draft time of year, so you're going to start to see some draft I'm working on one draft profile now. You're going to start to see mock drafts like crazy, and draft debates and everything like that. Definitely give us a follow. And if you aren't already following or a member of our Bayou Blitz Facebook page, please do. The little contest that Kyle mentioned a few minutes ago. We've had it up for 2 weeks now, and we've gotten some likes and some comments, but haven't gotten any participants.
I think it's because a lot of people are scared to do it. So I think I can be able to get them to kind of get out of their turtle shell in the next couple of weeks. So we'll put it up again, and we'll see how we get a little bit more response as a result. Were you saying something else about the follows before I go into?
All I was going to say was I know we get a lot of listener support, and you guys have been great in your comments to Kyle and I leading up to and after our shows. But we want you to participate. This is your show as much as it is ours, and this is a fun little contest. We want to get your legitimate thoughts on what the Saints have done and what you think that they'd like to do. Hey, listen, all Kyle and I are doing is spewing our own opinions. We'd like to hear yours, and we'd like to hear your input on the show, and this is a way to do it. So send those audio or video clips, either post them in the group or send them to Kyle and I individually. And like Kyle said, we'll continue to post the links up on how to do it. But if you have any questions, get in contact with one or both of us. We want you to help us out. We won't embarrass you. We're having fun with this. Hey, listen, if I can do this, anybody can.
Well, look, they haven't thrown me off yet, but they have tried. And we'll go from there, man. Look, Saints fans and Who Dats, you can always follow Barry Hurstis, as well as his featured columns at www.saintsnewsnetwork.com. You can also follow us at Saints News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. If there's anything that you need to know, if there's any hollers that you need to get to me, you can always email me at kmosley, that's KMOSLEY, at saintsnews.net. All right. Look, a lot of thoughts. I think we have had a positive week thus far. You guys be safe in the Who Dat Nation. Listen to us next week. I know we have had quite a few of you guys listening in and downloading our podcast. Tell us how we're doing. Let us know if there are any segments that you would like to add for us, and we will surely try to oblige. All right, this is Kyle T. Mosley of Saints News Network with Mr. Bob Rose of the Bayou Blitz, as well as the Canal Street Chronicles, and Nick Underhill. We will miss you, my man. I know you're covering the Patriots now for the Athletics. I still can't believe that, but I know you're doing some great things. And Nick Underhill, and it's so odd, Bob, he just won that Best Writing Award.
I know.
For his expose, or his featured column of every pass Drew Brees made since becoming a Saint. Wow. Think the detail had to go into that. So, Nick, hope you do well. It's going to be a void, but I believe Bob Rose and his quality writing will be there to pick up this spell. This is Kyle T. Mosley. As I said once before, you and the Who Dat Nation, y'all have a great, great time. We out here. Peace. Y'all take care. Bye.